And bhakti and self-inquiry for me are essentially the same. They take different forms outwardly, but essentially they're the same thing because they're both expressions of your heart's longing to come home. Bhakti, when you have love and devotion, typically bhakti is directed outwardly, so to some kind of name or form, whether it's Bhagavan, Ramana, or another deity, or some kind of other name and form that you're giving love to, that you're feeling love for, that you're feeling devotion for. Whereas self-inquiry is that same love, devotion, but instead of it being turned outward, it's turned within to ourself. It's turned towards the subject. So we feel totally in love with ourself, not ourself as body-mind, but ourself, as pure consciousness, which is everywhere, everything. In terms of feeling disembodied, feeling detached, it's an interesting phrase. I think it was at the last meeting. Was it on Thursday's meeting that I mentioned the word jiva? Jiva, which means the ignorance. The jiva is when you consider yourself to be a limited body-mind entity. The literal meaning of the word jiva is embodied, because in that context, it means that the vast infinite consciousness has been reduced to a mere limited body. What happens, though, is that many of us in the West, in the East, we are caught up in the mind. We're caught up in our headspace, in thought, in thinking. So we can imagine that the energy is mainly here. That concentration of our attention is mainly here. We're using thinking to navigate the world. We're using thinking as a way of interacting, a way of living our life. Thinking is our predominant means how we navigate our life. So it's all in the thinking, and it feels like the energy is all up here. And when the energy is completely up here, it feels like we're shut off from the rest of our body. Everything kind of neck down, you see. So when we talk about becoming more with the body, we're talking about it from the context of you're already in the body, but the problem is you're not in the whole body. You're just in your headspace, in the thoughts, in the mind. Thinking, worrying, desiring, fearing, whatever it is, whatever cognitive process is going on, desire, fear, thought, preoccupation with thinking. So we kind of forget everything from the neck down. One of my friends is an illustrator, fairly famous illustrator. And he does these illustrations these caricatures. And one of my children saw some of these illustrations. And in these drawings, it's slightly cartoonish. The heads are much bigger than the bodies. You know? Do you know what I mean? And my son was asking me, why is he drawing it with the head so big? Why are the heads so big? So I was trying to, it's not easy to explain why we do caricatures and things like this. So I was exploring that with him, explaining that. That's a bit like a pictorial representation of what it is to be disembodied in the head. We're not disembodied. We're actually just in a part of our body. Now, and the head is like enlarged, figuratively speaking, you see. But when we bring our attention to the whole of our body, it feels like the balance is returning. So it's very important to go from the head into the body. It feels like the energy is going from the head into the heart. It can even go into the abdomen, you see. We've got this, the energy drops down and becomes more centered. It's not top heavy, it's centered and balanced. This is wonderful. We're getting in touch with our feelings now, feelings of the body. We're getting in touch with our intuition, which partly comes through our body, it seems. Yeah. So this is why it's important to be in the body. When we're becoming totally in the total body, physical body, not just a part of it. Do you see, Joe? But then we can go, what self-inquiry does, this same process goes more. We just take it even further. We're not retreating back into the mind again, which will feel disembodied. We're expanding further into consciousness. The consciousness which everything appears in. The body appears in our consciousness. The mind appears in our consciousness. And yes, the world appears, all the worldly objects appear in our consciousness. The room you're sitting in now appears within your consciousness. In the same way, we can go from just connecting mainly with the mind to connecting with the body. We can go from connecting with the body-mind to connecting with the entire world of objects. When we do this, that feeling of holisticness, of wholeness, of health, of balance, increases even further. Because instead of just being preoccupied with a part of reality, in the same way we were just preoccupied with a part of our body, the head, now we're expanded our consciousness to the body. Now we expand it to everything. We become one with everything. This is understanding the conscious. This is we're consciousness. This is now coming into contact with our identity, not just as mind, not just as body-mind, but as body, mind, world, consciousness, the consciousness. We're getting into touch with the reality now. This is explained in the first couple of paragraphs of Who Am I? But in a different way. When Ramana says, you are not the body, you are not the mind, you are the consciousness. The consciousness is the all-pervading consciousness, not some kind of small thing divorced. It's the all-pervading consciousness that you are. When you go into the consciousness in this way, it will feel whole. It will feel complete. You won't feel disembodied. You see, you'll feel full. You won't feel partial, part. You won't feel like a part, a fragment. You'll feel whole. You'll feel full. You see, it's expansive. From that place of expansion, which is a savikalpa state. Savikalpa. Have you heard that word before?
Yes, savikalpa, nirvikalpa, sahaja samadhi. Yeah, the natural one. I'm familiar with it. It's just experiences sometimes, and the intensity of inquiry can go very intense. Sometimes it leads to this separation in myself. It's not always my experience, and I'm sure it's exactly what you said. So.
Exactly. So what happens when it feels tight and constricted? That's an indication that you need to do the opposite. You need to relax. You know, that's why you like the bhakti. What does the bhakti do? Bhakti gets you out of your head, gets you into the heart. So your intuitive intelligence is telling you this is what you need to do anyway. You see, the culmination of bhakti is self-inquiry. Bhakti will end up in self-inquiry. Once we've completely expanded ourselves into the universe, we then realize we are the full consciousness. And then we go into the consciousness from the savikalpa state. Savikalpa in this context means with objects. It means a state where objects are present. But to go from a very constricted mind, say you're very up in your head, to the self is going to be difficult, because what will happen is that you can imagine the ego being a very, very tall tower, and let's say as you get older, as you become more egotistical, this tower grows and grows and grows, and you become right to the very top of this very tall tower. You're at the very top, bit like Rapunzel at the top of her tower, you know. Now, to get back to the self, you've got to go down all these stairs, maybe a spiral staircase, and go back to the ground, and then you can come back to the self, which is the reality. You're not off in the clouds in illusion. But what happens is, if we're at the top of this tall tower of the ego, and then we try and find the self, what happens? We're trying to find it from the top, and we don't find it. We just end up causing pain, constriction. We have to relax, come back down, unwind, come back down, come back from the mind into the body, from the body into the universe, from the universe into the self. Otherwise, it becomes just a mental affair. Whereas self-inquiry is not a mental affair. It's an affair of the heart. It's bhakti, you see. If you divorce self-inquiry from bhakti, it can become just an egotistical mental thing, and then it becomes very dry and boring, and it becomes laborious. It becomes a task that you do because it's written in a book or because so-and-so said so. Whereas self-inquiry is a love affair with the self. But you can go into this expansive sarvikalpa state where you feel one with all objects, and then you can say, well, who am I? Am I these objects? No. These come and go. Do I want to bother with these objects? Are these objects going to give me lasting peace, lasting happiness? No.